Our webinar today is going to highlight some of the advantages and pitfalls of setting up blockchain and distributed ledger technology, how likely it's to affect your business. I'm going to explore some of the common themes and issues. My name is Mark Craig, and I'm Associate Director for the Company Secretariat team here at Jordan's in Bristol. I'm joined today by my colleague Declan Goodwin, who is Associate Director Solicitor at Jordan's Corporate Law. Morning.
Morning, Mark.
Due to the high number of attendees in the call, you've all been put on mute for the duration of the webinar. However, it is designed to be as interactive as possible. So we'd be grateful if you could email me with any questions throughout the session. My email address is on the screen right now at the top right-hand corner, which is mark_craig@jordans.co.uk. That's mark_craig@jordans.co.uk. Any questions that we don't manage to get through during the course of the session will be answered by email after the event, but we'll see if we can get any, if there's time at the end. We plan to be time at the end for answering some questions. But without any further delay, let's begin today's webinar. Over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So first of all, you might be thinking, well, why is a lawyer telling us all about blockchain? What does he know? So I thought it'd be helpful to kick off by telling you a tiny bit about myself. As Mark said, I'm a solicitor at Jordan's Corporate Law, which is the law firm arm of Jordan's. We're a corporate commercial focused law firm providing corporate law services, commercial law and also employment law. So I'm a tech lawyer. I work with clients in the tech sector, but also clients outside the tech sector when they're engaged in technology projects. My blockchain experience mostly comes from a 6-month secondment with the Royal Mint. So they went through a process of launching their own blockchain-based product, which was essentially crypto coins or cryptocurrency backed by gold. So I advised them on a number of financial service regulatory issues. I learned a hell of a lot about blockchain and also quite a lot about the ancient intricacies of the gold market.
Sure.
So along the way, we partnered with some great partners. So we put the contracts in place with those partners and advised on the sorts of contracts that would be required with customers wanting to buy RMG. Off the back of that experience, I've also advised on a number of ICOs and TIEs. So that's initial coin offerings and token issuing events. We'll get into what exactly those are further on in the webinar. So just a quick look at what we're going to cover. We've already done the introductions. We're going to then move on to a look at the brief history of blockchain and where it's come from. We'll then move on to an explanation of what the technology is and how it works. Moving on then to some real-world examples of blockchain uses. And then we'll look at its relevance to you and to us.
We just add there that point about questions. For anyone who's joined late, especially my email address on the screen there, mark_craig@jordans.co.uk. If you have any questions throughout the course of this webinar, please send them along, and we'll hopefully address them at the end of the session. Any we don't get through, we will address by email after the event. Thanks.
Great. So kicking off with the history of blockchain, we've got a timeline on the slide which starts in the 1990s. So I think that tells us that the idea and sort of the concepts and the underlying technology that makes blockchain is quite old. It's which suggests that it might not be that complex. I'm not going to go through each item on the timeline, but essentially digital currency software developed in the 1990s. Each iteration that we can see on the timeline improved on the previous one. And by the time we got to Bitcoin in 2008, I think a number of improvements had been made, a number of issues had been solved, and the technology had got to a stage where it could really take off. But there were certainly a number of things that contributed to it taking off. Not just the fact that it was really interesting and novel technology. So in 2008, let's take a look at what else happened. So I couldn't resist highlighting the fact that my beloved Welsh rugby team won the 2008 Six Nations Rugby Championship.
You didn't hold on to it though, did you?
No, Mark. No, I think Ireland may have won it the following year.
There you go.
A strange thing happened. Boris Johnson became Mayor of London. We also had Usain Bolt winning the 100 and 200 meters and setting world records in Beijing. And our lovely Swedish friends brought us the Spotify technology. But the event that we're really looking at here in 2008 is the financial crash and the credit crunch. So as we all know, essentially the banks mess things up for us, or that was the general feeling. And there was a lot of distrust placed on the financial system, and some people started to look for alternatives. One of those happened to be Bitcoin, and the idea, one of the key ideas behind Bitcoin is the fact that it's decentralized. There's no single authority like a bank or a financial institution controlling things behind the scenes. So people were able to digitally transact without having to involve the banks. So moving on to a bit more about the so-called creator of Bitcoin, Satoshi Nakamoto. I say so-called because there's a bit of a mystery behind who that person is, or whether it is even a person. Some say it's a collective.
They never got to the bottom of that, did they?
They didn't know, and
there's
there's a number of theories out there on the internet if you've got the time to look them up. I think one thing worth noting though is the fact that this person is thought to have the largest holding of Bitcoin in the world. So whoever it is, they're now extremely wealthy because over the past 10 years. One Bitcoin has gone from a value of effectively zero to peaking about 10, 11 months ago at almost $18,000. So people are clearly putting value in the technology that Satoshi Nakamoto created. So as I said, we've had a number of iterations of this type of technology, and finally Bitcoin was created. I've got the abstract up on the slide. So Satoshi Nakamoto has published his white paper on Bitcoin in 2008, and this is available on the internet link that's on the slide. I'm not going to run through this word by word, but I thought it'd be helpful to pick out some of the key aspects from the abstract. So first, we've got the fact that this is a peer-to-peer payment system. So again, that means there's no banks involved. It's a system that creates time-stamped transactions to prevent double spending. So with a traditional banking system, if you had £100 in your account and spent £100 on Amazon and then spent another £100 on eBay, your account would be showing minus £100. The bank would then more than likely charge you interest or some sort of penalty to deal with the fact that you've spent money you haven't got. You'd then be required to put your balance back to zero or a positive amount to avoid further charges. with a decentralized system, there's no single authority controlling what happens if you spend money you haven't got. So to avoid that scenario, we've got this timestamp transaction. So that effectively means the network can tell immediately once your transaction has been registered, that any attempt to spend the same Bitcoin after the timestamp on the first transaction would not be accepted by the network. Next, the abstract states that the records that are created on the blockchain will be immutable. So effectively, they can't be changed. That makes them reliable and trustworthy. Again, another aspect of the system, the fact it's peer-to-peer and everyone holds a copy of the blockchain. If it all matches up, we know we can trust it. Again, which means there's no reason to have a central authority controlling a single source of truth. Finally, the next point is the fact that the abstract states the technology is extremely secure. So when we hear the words cryptocurrency, the crypto aspect of that is the fact that the technology contains complex cryptography. So in order to broadcast a transaction to the network and have that transaction accepted by the network, a lot of numbers have to be crunched to sort of solve the cryptography elements of the technology. So essentially, it's very hard to trick the system. That said, you do hear about hacks relating to cryptocurrencies, but that's not necessarily hacks of the technology. That's hacking the wallet where the cryptocurrency is held. So again, there are ways around that. So by taking your cryptocurrency offline and holding it in hardware as opposed to on the internet or a network connected to a blockchain. So just drilling down into the technology a bit deeper, we've got a description of what a blockchain is on the slide. So if we take it in stages, we can start with the fact that it's a digital database or a ledger. That's a blockchain in its most simple form. Essentially, you could compare it to any spreadsheet that you've produced on Excel. The following points emphasize how it differs from that Excel spreadsheet. So we've got a digital database. It's distributed across a network of computers or nodes, or you might also come across the term miners. So that means that there are several copies of this database distributed across a network of computers. That's the decentralized peer-to-peer element of the technology. The blockchain contains an increasing number of data records. So the data on the blockchain is linear. You don't go back and change data that's previously been put on the blockchain. Any amendments or additional data is added. And new blocks contain data that link it to the previous block in the chain, so that when data is uploaded to the network, everybody's copy knows where to put that new data. So when a transaction takes place, it's broadcast to the network of miners or validators or nodes, depending on the blockchain we're dealing with for authentication, and then it's then added to the chain once the cryptography aspect has worked its way through and the transaction can be approved. That can take a matter of seconds or a matter of hours, depending on the blockchain that's being used. Typically, the Bitcoin blockchain would take a number of hours. the Ripple blockchain, for example, might take a number of seconds. So again, blockchain has been around the longest, so over 10 years now. So new blockchains have been created, or new distributed ledger technology has been created over the last sort of 3 to 4 years, that have made improvements on blockchain, on the Bitcoin blockchain. So we've covered the powerful cryptography aspect, and then finally, it's almost entirely protected against human error, editing, tampering, removal, and revision. So again, it's possible to trust this technology without the need for a central source of truth like a bank or a financial institution. Transactions are initiated using digital signatures or keys, and they're essentially a mixture of letters and numbers. So that provides an element of confidentiality. So your name would not appear in a blockchain when going through a digital transaction or a cryptocurrency transaction. Only your key would be contained in the data. So unless someone has the ability to link a person to a particular key, that transaction would be confidential.
Anonymous, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So moving on, we're going to look at some of the terminology around this technology. So first, I'd like to make the distinction between distributed ledger technology and blockchain. Essentially, blockchain is a type of distributed ledger technology. So if you imagine blockchain as an apple, distributed ledger technology, or DLT, would be the fruit. So that's emphasized by the slide here. So in the same way, a Hoover would be a vacuum cleaner, or Google would be a search engine, blockchain is a DLT. So to bring that to life, the Bitcoin blockchain is also a blockchain where things and it can be it's not always immediately obvious what is a blockchain and what isn't, what's more sort of generally DLT. Some people make the distinguish between a blockchain and sort of general DLT technology by the fact that certain blockchains aren't decentralized in the same way Ethereum or Bitcoin might be. So an example of that would be the Ripple blockchain. So the difference there is it's not possible to mine XRP, which is the token used on the Ripple blockchain, whereas it is possible to mine Bitcoin or Ether on the Ethereum blockchain. So whilst the ledger is still distributed across a number of different nodes for the purpose of approving transactions, Ripple, the company at the heart of the Ripple blockchain, still have control over the issuance of XRP. And the same was true on the Royal Mint RMG blockchain that I worked on. The Royal Mint had an element of control over the amount of RMG that was issued into that blockchain. So next we've got centralized versus decentralized, sort of just picking up on some of the things I've just said there. These examples on this slide here sort of emphasize what a centralized system would look like, and a decentralized system on the right side of the slide. So it's obvious with the centralized system that we've got an entity at the heart of it controlling the flow of transactions between all the various different clients. With a decentralized system, we've got a number of nodes or validators or miners, with no single one of them being the controlling party there. So it's probably important to emphasize, though, that these two diagrams aren't 100% comparable. The diagram, the decentralized diagram, would essentially replace the bank on the centralized diagram. So it's actually a lot more complex than what this slide shows.
I've seen some very complex images on this. Oh, yeah, there's an example there. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a diagram showing, and again, this is also simplified. But this is what a blockchain diagram would more than likely look like. So here we've got computer stacks, or the nodes or validators or miners. But again, this is emphasizing the fact that there's no single one of them on the slide showing that they are controlling the network. And then the reality is kind of emphasized by this slide, the fact that there's actually hundreds, often thousands of people involved on these networks. So moving on, I've mentioned mining and validators and nodes a few times now. So as I said, the Bitcoin blockchain works on the basis of mining. That's essentially effort for payment. So the nodes or validators or miners on the network get paid by the network for validating transactions. I also said earlier that validating the transactions involves crunching a lot of numbers, using complex hardware to do that. So there's generally a lot of energy required to run those computers to compute those transactions. So anyone listening might be thinking, well, I could power up my laptop or my desktop and try and earn a nice sum of bitcoins whilst I'm away from my office overnight. It's probably not gonna work in that sort of way. This industry has moved at breakneck speed, and the ability to sort of set yourself up as a miner at a profitable rate the ship has sailed on that opportunity. It's very much a large commercial enterprise these days, in the same way that data centers are run. Miners are now operating vast amounts of computer stacks in the most economically advantageous locations. So that would be where electricity costs are low, or zero if you're running renewable technologies.
There's also that one story a few years ago now, probably, but there was the Tesla driver who, because he had a free electricity supply from his supercharger for his Tesla, would take his Tesla, charge it up every day, take it home, and run his computer stacks to actually mine. Just slightly naughty, obviously, and probably against all T's and C's, but it's kind of interesting to see. There's obviously some innovation out there.
Yeah, definitely, and you know, there's definitely ways ways around creating efficiencies in order to still try and make a bit of money out of this activity. Yeah, so but he might also need to think about cooling his computer systems as well. So let's hope that guy lived in Iceland or somewhere like that, where it's nice and cold. So as I said, the Bitcoin blockchain allows people to take payment for computing transactions. That fee is currently I think 12.5 Bitcoin per block mined. So there are a number of transactions bundled together into a single block on the Bitcoin blockchain. So it's not a case of computing one transaction and then earning 12.5 Bitcoin, which would probably net you around £70,000 at the moment, something rough, 70 to 100 maybe, something like that. And built into the protocols of the blockchain for Bitcoin is the fact that the amount that miners get paid is halved every 4 years. So eventually, the network won't pay them anything for participating. Eventually, the miners will simply charge transaction fees to the people involved in those transactions, which already occurs now, and often the higher the bounty you place on pushing your transaction through, the quicker it will be prioritized by the miners to complete. So moving on, we're going to look at some examples of blockchains. I've mentioned Bitcoin and Ethereum and Ripple earlier in the webinar. So on this slide, I've got all the various logos and icons here. So Bitcoin, the Bitcoin blockchain has Bitcoin as its token or cryptocurrency on that blockchain. It's primarily used, well, almost 100% used for the purpose of transactions for value, so trading Bitcoin. The Ethereum blockchain was I think only created in the last maybe 2014. So again, it's solved or improved a few aspects and added functionality on top of what Bitcoin blockchain can do. Again, so the cryptocurrency or token on this blockchain is known as Ether. You've got the sort of double-edged pyramid or diamond logo for that. So again, this is traded for value in the same way that Bitcoin is, but it's also got many other uses. It can be used as what's called a utility token or utility coin. So it can be used for the purpose of setting up smart contracts or distributed ledger apps or dApps. And its third purpose is it's very adaptable. So you've got a standard specification for Ether tokens known as ERC20, which allows developers to build their own tokens on top of this specification. So most or almost all blockchains are built on the basis of open source software, so it's free to use, the software that underlies this, subject to various T's and C's. So ERC20 tokens allow people to, rather than start from scratch and build a blockchain and compatible tokens, it allows people to take something that's already been built and add to it. So from a utility token point of view, you can create tokens relatively quickly that are relevant to your product or service, which is very enticing for startups, as it's a cheap way to get off the ground. So you might see many ICOs are the tokens issued through them use ERC20 tokens, and it's a widely accepted standard, which would mean the wallet that holds your tokens is able to accept them without too much development required on the wallet side of things. Ripple is another prevalent blockchain, or DLT. Again, that was created after Ethereum, so again, its selling point is it's an improvement on what's come before. I've no idea if this is true, but Ripple likes to advertise itself as 1,000 times cheaper and 1,000 times quicker than Bitcoin. So in terms of the cost of verifying transactions using Ripple, it's very cheap, and in terms of the time taken to verify transactions, it's very quick.
1,000 times is quite a statement.
Yeah, exactly. Which and Ripple's background isn't. They weren't. They're not a blockchain startup. They're a financial services technology company. So their background is in producing systems for banks. So they've effectively seen the benefits of blockchain technology or DLT technology and created products for internal use by financial institutions to speed up transactions internally for banks. So they've got a number of well-known customers. I think Santander use Ripple and the XRP tokens that are used on that blockchain. So one thing I didn't mention on this slide was security tokens. So almost all of the examples we've referred to so far have the ability to create value. So the coins themselves can be traded in their own right. They can also be used to issue assets. So that would extend to securities. So for shares or bonds, they could be issued via a blockchain. And in the UK, the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority, has decided at this stage anyway not to create specific regulations for the purposes of cryptocurrencies or blockchains, ICOs. They're relying on the existing financial services regulation. So it's important for anyone in this space to check whether or not they're caught by any of that legislation. So there's quite often a big emphasis on whether new tokens or are utility tokens. They have a use, a purpose. They can be used to buy or sell specific products or services, or whether they are a security. That's not to say that blockchain companies are trying to avoid regulation. A lot of them actually favor regulation. They recognize the fact that some operators in this space are maybe more scrupulous than you might like, and regulation provides a certain level of approval. The fact that you can describe yourself as being regulated means you're not you're going to be able to sell your products and service with a degree of confidence in that what you're doing isn't going to be questioned by authorities down the road. So let's look at some examples of how various different companies or organizations are using blockchain outside of the sort of cryptocurrency space. So this is what's often referred to as enterprise blockchain. So using the technology in a more corporate context. So the first example we've got here is the Australian Stock Exchange, and the fact that they're using blockchain to clear and settle trades. I think the Swiss stock exchange are also doing that right now, and as I said, Santander are using Ripple as well.
I recall, obviously, the pilot for the ASX a couple of years ago, so it's obviously continuing to go strongly there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they're one of the sort of torchbearers out there in the market, and showing successful and effective and efficient use of blockchain technology. We've also got a lot of interest in using blockchain for land-based transactions. So we've got Ukraine, Georgia, and Sweden, some of the early adopters of blockchain for land transactions. So that would be the land registries in each of those countries recording ownership of land via a blockchain, and the sort of change of ownership that occurs during a transaction on a blockchain. The UK Land Registry also announced within the last 2 or 3 weeks that they're going to be reviewing the benefits of using blockchain for their own purposes. That's part of their Digital Street project, and they're going to be using a blockchain known as Corda, which has been developed by a company called R3. Next, we've got a sort of smart contract example. So there's AXA Insurance have created a product which uses Ether on the Ethereum, built on the Ethereum blockchain. So they've got a smart contract that pulls in data from flight details, and if a flight is late, then the person who's purchased the applicable insurance could immediately benefit from a payout without the need to issue an insurance claim. So upon the late flight data being pulled into the smart contract, that triggers an automatic mechanism to pay out to the beneficiary of the insurance. Other examples of smart contracts, we've got the fact that it's being used in copyright licensing. So anyone familiar with the artist Imogen Heap, she's a big advocate for using blockchain in the music industry. Essentially, it cuts out the middleman. It would be a case of the artist making their music or other content available via the blockchain, and people being able to purchase that music or other works via the blockchain, with royalty fees effectively going directly to the artist. I think Sony announced in the last few weeks that they've built a digital rights management system on the blockchain. I think what that shows is they've seen the benefits of the efficiencies that can be achieved using this system, and potentially it's a bit of a land grab to establish themselves as an operator in this space, rather than leaving the opportunity for the artists to sort of take matters into their own hands.
Shows a bit more of its sort of regularity or commonality. It's becoming more and more common, or less niche.
Absolutely. Which sort of the next example I've got is the fact that Fidelity Investments have launched or will be launching a cryptocurrency trading and storage platform. So they're the 4th largest asset manager in the world. They have $7 trillion under management. So it is very much becoming mainstream. And with that, we've got lots of new cryptocurrencies coming online at the moment. The term being used is stable coins. So one of the issues with cryptocurrencies is that their value is quite volatile. So There's lots of new cryptocurrencies being issued that track more stable assets. So many track the price of the dollar. Project I worked on with the Royal Mint, the idea was RMG would almost track the price of gold, because one RMG equated to 1 gram of gold.
RMG being Royal
Mint Gold.
Royal Mint Gold.
Yeah. So again, with people considering cryptocurrencies as a viable investment, there's obviously, as I'm sure most financial advisors would say, it's important to diversify. So there's a market being created for more stable options. We've also got in the news in the last few weeks that there are cities in the United States now creating legislation from a planning point of view around the use of property and land for the purposes of blockchain mining. Again, recognizing the impact that the industry is having on where we live. So there's legislation coming online which will affect where and how miners can operate. So we're going to now look at why this is relevant. Why should I care about this? Hopefully you've picked up on a few of these points throughout the presentation. I think the first point is the fact that there's certain aspects of this technology which means that once it's implemented, it can often achieve efficiencies for a number of businesses. Oh, apologies, I did miss out the last example, which sort of links into this efficiency example. Blockchains are really useful for supply chain purposes. So any industry where it's important to trace where things have come from, the fact that you can trust a blockchain and that records are immutable, the fact they can't be changed, means it's great technology for tracking various different things through a supply chain. So the examples we've got here are diamonds. There's obvious ethical reasons for wanting to track where your diamonds come from, and who's touched it along the way, from mine to the jewelry shop. So that's come online as a viable use. We've also got Walmart in the US have implemented blockchain technology for tracing where their pork products have come from, and I think that stems from the fact that they've started using a lot of Chinese pork in their products, and again, for sort of quality standards and ethical reasons, knowing where the pork products have come from is important to them. So moving back to the relevance to business, we've touched on the efficiencies. So bringing that to life, in our world, onboarding clients is a big part of what we do. So know your client procedures and ID procedures are extremely important. It can be quite a painful process for clients, and there are a number of solutions out there built on blockchain technology which allow clients to effectively go through the process once by putting their details in a blockchain and then sharing those details via providing companies like ourselves with keys to access their data. So the data remains confidential only to those people that have the keys to access it. Another one would be, again, an example of how blockchain technology is being used in our industry, the management of authorized signatory lists. So a company might have a number of directors that are allowed to approve certain things, and that can all be managed very, very efficiently via a blockchain. Again, you could provide third parties with keys to access that data, allowing them to double check that the £1 million contract that's just been signed has been signed by a person that's permitted to do so. I think another, building on the sort of efficiency benefits, another point would be it's probably a good idea to look at the benefits of this technology to stay ahead. So that's staying ahead of your competitors, but also making sure that your customers are also being provided with products and services that continue to meet their needs. So it goes without saying for any technology, really. It's important to sort of stay ahead of the game rather than resting on your laurels. Some of the issues to be aware of in this sector, and you'll notice most of them here relate to the cryptocurrency side of things rather than the enterprise blockchain side of things. I think it's really important to make that distinction. A lot of people can be put off blockchain because all they hear about is some of the negative sides of things from the cryptocurrency perspective. But as we've seen on the enterprise level, blockchain has many benefits. So it would be wrong to dismiss them simply because of some of the bad press that we see coming from cryptocurrencies. So firstly, due to the fact there's the anonymity aspect of cryptocurrency transactions, if you're dealing with anyone in this sector, it's quite important to get comfortable with who you're dealing with. So it might be a case of taking a bit more time to complete and double check all of your AML checks, your sanctions checks, origin of funds. You might also want to go further, sort of outside of the regulatory requirements, and undertake PR searches on the people you're dealing with. Look for any bad press they've had in relation to this industry, and then if there is any, ask them about it. Get sort of full disclosure. We've seen people ask for compliance statements to provide a bit of comfort that you are compliant. We've also come across people asking for copies of policies and procedures that third parties have. For example, another party's AML policies, and then confirmation that they've been followed. As I said earlier, cryptocurrencies lack regulation in some jurisdictions. Not all. There's places like Gibraltar and Malta that have implemented legislation, but that lack of regulation in jurisdictions like our own here in the UK provides a bit of uncertainty, and that could change as well. For example, China almost overnight banned Bitcoin. So that lack of regulation provides uncertainty. And as I said earlier, cryptocurrencies are also volatile. So if you've got a customer whose wealth and value derives from cryptocurrencies alone, you need to be sure they're going to be able to pay for that large order that they've just placed with you.
Okay. Thank you, Declan. So now's an opportunity for questions. On screen, you've got my email address, mark_craig@jordans.co.uk. Please send any further questions through to me, and we'll field them within this session. That email address on screen, mark_craig@jordans.co.uk. We do have some questions through, and I'm going to ask some of them and paraphrase some and bring them together. I think there's a couple of questions here. One, And there's a couple of associated questions. There's one here about, isn't this a flash in the pan? Governments don't like it and they'll be outlawed soon. And it reminds me of the slide earlier about it's like a gold rush. And there's another question similar in its context, I think, which is many people have a perception that cryptocurrency's primary purpose is to allow operators to make purchases on the dark web. So the point about regulation. Your thoughts on that, Declan?
Yeah, I think that sort of touches on some of the comments I made towards the end of the webinar, and the sort of some of the issues surrounding cryptocurrency. There's absolutely no getting away from the fact that unfortunately certain people have utilized this technology to make illicit purchases on things like the dark web, which is a format of the internet that is hidden to most people.
Yeah, so that's like saying let's outlaw cash because it can be used for illicit purposes, or let's outlaw cars because it can be used for illicit purposes, or it's out there, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And I think initially that's what people thought to do, and that's certainly what governments thought to do. But they have found ways around this. It's not as obvious to them sometimes as a cash transaction would be, but you can guarantee that the Serious Organised Crime Agency has got a number of very clever people on this, as well as other agencies around the world who are out there developing ways of tracking payments on blockchains. It is difficult, but it's not always impossible to work out how cryptocurrencies are being used for illicit purposes. There is sort of what's known as data leakage from transactions, and it's also possible to develop patterns as well that can contribute to sort of catching the bad apples out there using cryptocurrencies. Just touching on that sort of flash in the pan aspect of the question, I think again that's maybe a view that a lot of people had maybe 12 to 18 months ago, but we've sort of come through a phase of corporate entities looking at the technology and establishing whether it's got viable uses, and we're now seeing those projects come online. So in my personal opinion, blockchain and distributed ledger technology is certainly here to stay. Cryptocurrencies, I think that there's a question mark out there. Like I said, the Chinese government banned it almost, or banned Bitcoin almost overnight. Who's to say that couldn't happen elsewhere? But I think eventually governments will embrace it, or they will create their own cryptocurrency that they've got a bit more control over.
Mm-hmm. We've 5 more minutes and we will wrap it up on the hour. It's maybe time for one more question. I guess it's a simple one. What's the difference between Bitcoin and Ethereum? I think that's partly what you referred to earlier on a slide, Declan, about the difference between Bitcoin and Ethereum. They're both currencies, cryptocurrencies, but I think they're used for different purposes. You touched on.
Yeah, there's definitely similarities, but there are differences. So the first is they have different values, and that so they are, but the similarity there is the fact that they are both traded for value. So if you were to log on to any cryptocurrency exchange, you'd see prices or values advertised for both type of cryptocurrency. But that's really where the use for Bitcoin tends to stop for most people. It's simply traded for value and not much else. Whereas Ether on the Ethereum blockchain can be used as a utility token. So you can attach
or contracts, smart contracts, and things you mentioned.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and also distributed ledger apps or DApps. So it's got purposes, and also one of the things I sort of emphasised earlier on was the fact that with most new blockchains or DLT created, they tend to try and solve or improve issues. So the amount of data that can be crammed into each block might be better, or the way in which transactions are added to the blockchain might be improved. The speed at which blocks or transactions are done might be improved. And I think that's sort of emphasized more by the creation of Ripple, sort of maybe 6 years or so after Bitcoin, and in those 6 years they claim to improved to make it 1,000 times quicker and cheaper.
Yeah. We've got, I think, time for one more. Let's squeeze one more in. So thinking of, again, just very quickly. Question, how do you, I'll paraphrase it, sometimes find that others are not enthusiastic or willing to learn? How do you come across approach to, I guess, persuade colleagues or clients about the benefits of blockchain and how it's going to revolutionize how we operate? So kind of, I guess it's a general question about, we see a lot of negativity. How do we get over that?
Yeah, and I think, as I said, with most people, it's a case of differentiating between the two most prevalent markets at a high level. So the cryptocurrency market and the enterprise blockchain market. And there's obviously people have initially been attracted to the cryptocurrency side of things because we've got the opportunity for every man and his dog to become millionaires overnight, and who wouldn't be attracted to that? Obviously, with that opportunity, the people have taken advantage, and there's been a lot of scams out there, and a lot of, as I said, illicit purchases using cryptocurrency. So I think it's a case of moving away from emphasizing those examples and looking at the sort of the torchbearers and on the corporate and the enterprise side of things. We've got the likes of Microsoft piling in and investing in companies in this area. I think once companies like that make this technology mainstream and available to the masses, it simply won't be a case of having to convince people that this is the way to go. It'll be, this is the only option.
This is how it works.
Exactly. Yeah, I think sort of Microsoft tend to do things one way.
Yeah.
So if they develop a new product, there won't be too many options. It will be, this is how we do it, and it uses a blockchain.
Okay. I want to respect everyone's time. I'm going to wrap it up there on the hour or thereabouts. Thank you for joining us all this morning. We really hope you found it useful. Any questions we received during the course, there's a couple, and any questions indeed we receive hereafter, we'll get back to you separately. We'll address them by email. We've made a recording of today's webinar, and if you want to listen to it again, you'll get a link, or if you want your colleagues to listen to it, you can do so. And please also keep an eye out for future free webinars on our website. This is something we are, as part of a series of events. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.